I find new things because I am kind of digging in, doing my best, like critical listening and watching a bunch of videos and live videos, looking for like the right angle at the right time to see like what's Ed doing on guitar, what's Johnny doing, and that kind of stuff is really interesting to me to learn and to kind of go through that process.
You're listening to OK Podcast, a podcast by Sean Perrin about Radiohead.
About Radiohead. About Radiohead. About Radiohead. About Radiohead. About Radiohead. About Radiohead.
Welcome back to OK Podcast. I'm your host Sean Perrin, and this is the show where we discuss the musical and cultural impact of the world's greatest band, Radiohead. Today's special guest is Joe Edelmann, who creates note-perfect renditions of Radiohead songs on YouTube. We discuss how he picks songs to cover, his working methods, and his advice for other players looking to cover Radiohead songs themselves. We also dive into some analysis of the band's music as a whole and discuss a shared concert experience that we had at Osheaga in Montreal 2016. If you have any feedback, guest suggestions, or would like to be featured on the podcast yourself, please send me a message at hello@okpodcast.com, or you can now leave me a voicemail at okpodcast.com/voicemail. If you'd like to get access to the extended version of today's episode and many others, you can do this from just $1 per month at okpodcast.com/subscribe. Today on the extended version, you'll learn about what it was like for Joe to actually meet Radiohead's very own Ed O'Brien, some of his hobbies outside of music, and more. And now for Joe Edelmann on OK Podcast. So I'm here today with Joe Edelmann, who is, of course, the wonderful artist from YouTube who does some of the most accurate covers, I think, out there. And he's coming to us from New Jersey. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me.
I've been surfing through YouTube, checking out some of the covers, and I really do think that you are doing one of the most accurate jobs possible. So I want to start, and we're going to talk about your covers. I want to talk about the really great analysis you've done of Radiohead's music and the incredible ear that you have. But I want to just get started. For those listeners who maybe haven't encountered you before, could you just give a quick introduction, kind of like we just met at a party?
Sure. Yes, my name is Joe, and I'm a huge fan of the band Radiohead, obviously. I started a YouTube channel a couple years back and started making covers of their music and also, like you mentioned, some instructional content, kind of breaking apart their songs. I've played guitar for a long time. It's my primary instrument, but I also play in a couple different bands, make some original music inspired by Radiohead and other bands. And so, yeah, I just love making music, talking about it. It's kind of my MO.
And what's your background as a musician? Like, as I'm listening to your videos, you seem to have a very advanced knowledge. Did you do a degree in music or anything like that?
I took a few classes, a couple basic theory classes and music history and analysis classes while I was in college. And I was lucky to have a few guitar teachers early on, when I learned that, we're just really well versed in a lot of different styles and in theory. And at the time, I probably didn't take as much out of it as I probably should have. I had one guitarist who was an amazing jazz guitar player, and he, was teaching me a lot of those basic concepts about modes and those playing in different over different changes and keys and things like that, now going back, it's like, I wish I kind of had paid a little bit more attention there, because at that time I was probably just trying to learn the latest Led Zeppelin riff that I was interested in or something like that. But I've picked up things, obviously a lot of stuff by watching other YouTube content creators that are really great, folks like Adam Neely or Rick Beato or folks like that are kind of really big YouTube theory presences. I'm just always trying to learn something new. So that's kind of how I picked it up over the years.
I think a lot of people feel that way. I was looking back at my university days too, and I was like, man, if I could do it all over again, I'd really focus a lot more, and there'd be less time at the bar, and there'd be a little more focus on the music and stuff. But I love Rick Beato too. How do you think he gets all those stems? He always has the stems for everything.
Is my understanding that, he spent some time in industry. Like I don't know if he obviously has his own studio now, and he did some work, I guess, recording and producing and things like that. But yeah, I know he's got some awesome, like, isolated Led Zeppelin drum tracks and things like, how'd you get those?
It's everything. He always shows these. I was watching a video of bass performances the other day. He even seemed to have stem versions of broken down live shows. I was like, what?
Right, yeah.
How are you doing this? It's just crazy. So much great content on YouTube out there. And honestly, some of it is yours. I remember being really impressed recently because I'd watched a lot of your Radiohead and Tom York covers, of course. It's one of the things I just like to do is watch all kinds of those. And I started watching yours, and not only was I impressed by the way that you can completely match the band's sound, but even everything from Tom York's voice to just little intricacies in the guitar, it's all there. But then a couple weeks later, I was watching another cover by Interpol, and I was like, you're kind of standing farther away, and I couldn't really tell it was you until I think the bass part came in or something, and I was like, holy crap, this is the same guy. He's doing all these different bands. They're all so well done. So my first question is, like, how do you decide which songs you want to cover, and then how do you get them so just close to the original?
Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I, love doing it because it's just a lot of fun for me to kind of get under the skin of a lot of the bands I like. And like you mentioned, Radiohead is obviously the closest to my heart, but there's a lot of bands that I love. Interpol is another one of my, kind of favorite groups. So it kind of all started going back to, in terms of doing Radiohead covers on YouTube, was a project I was kind of involved with my band Burn Holiday. We decided we wanted to take a run at All of OK Computer, kind of in the honor of the anniversary. And so we kind of decided we're going to try and tackle the album in almost like a live context in our basement from start to finish. And so I kind of moved from doing that. We had a lot of fun with that experience. And then I was like, oh, well, I've got, the tools at my disposal, and maybe I should, try to do this with like the King of Limbs, for instance. So I started kind of shot matching, doing the, sort of recreation of they had, obviously Radiohead has their brilliant, basement version of that album, which really did kind of reframe it in that live context, as an amazing performance of those songs. And so I was trying to, how did they do that was, my question was trying to find, a lot of those cool synthesizer sounds or guitar tricks and things. And so that was kind of my first pilot test program of doing covers was those early covers. And even as I did those and now, I've kind of continued to get better and learn more about my gear and recording and mixing and things like that. So I kind of moved on from that and then just started going a little bit willy-nilly, following whatever was kind of inspiring me that week. So, obviously a lot more Radiohead from bouncing around the discography. And Interpol, I was like, this is another, I just love, for Interpol, I really love, obviously, the rhythm section, right? The drums and bass, they're really like a propulsive post-punky kind of band. So as a self-taught drummer, I'm obviously first and foremost a guitarist, but I love the drums. Like if I hadn't taken guitar, I probably would have just ended up, being a drummer more, first and foremost. So, I just I was like, I want to cover an Interpol song because those drum beats are so fun and they're like, very hooky, they have like a memorable, like drum melody almost, there's like things, identifiable patterns that make it kind of, pretty interesting. So that was kind of a logical next step. And then I branched out into some other bands. Tame Impala is another one, a big one for me because Kevin Parker obviously is the kind of the do-it-yourselfer. He's like a big inspiration in terms of creating sounds, on his own and things like that. So.
Well, you mentioned the kind of, you gravitate towards the songs that are kind of clicking with you that week. And I get that same thing. And it's so weird because I can listen to a song for literally 20 years. And then one day, I don't know, something that just kind of appears to me. Is that kind of how you describe that too?
Yeah, I think, for example, a song, it's not as, it hasn't been out in the universe as long, but when I decided to ultimately cover the song Daydreaming, which is, one of my favorite Radiohead songs now, I just think it's, a beautiful song. And there's that really lovely piano figure that Johnny does in the song. And, I think I had watched some videos because I'm also, studying other folks' covers. I take a lot of inspiration and give a lot of credit to the other people making piano tutorials and bass covers and drum covers and things. I watch a lot of those to draw upon for inspiration. And I was like trying to figure out, I'd seen tabs of that piano part and I was like, yeah, I don't understand how he's playing this because it's like, it's very, during the bridge of the song kind of where it gets a little bit more intricate and arpeggiated. And then I just remember, I don't know if it was I read somewhere because I'm always reading kind of like on Radiohead, fan sites and forums or, on Reddit and things like that. And I noticed that, he was doing this like interchange thing with two different parts, in the left and right hand. He was playing two, kind of separate interlocking pieces of the arpeggio. And when you play it, it's the main melody from the body of the song, but then he also adds these kind of two other black notes or the other notes in his left hand and just kind of alternates. And that little, I don't know, something about that was super cool to me. And that was like what clicked. And like when I did the cover, I was just like so excited to be like, oh, I learned this trick. And now I want to kind of, practice it and play it. But yeah, that happens all the time. I find new things because I am kind of digging in, doing my best, like critical listening and watching a bunch of videos and live videos, looking for like the right angle at the right time to see like what's Ed doing on guitar, what's Johnny doing, and that kind of stuff is really interesting to me to learn and to kind of go through that process. There's a site now that does like kind of an AI, tries to false separate. It does an okay job, I forget what it's called, but there's things like that. And I guess with In Rainbows, there were some stems out there, I think, because the Radiohead had hosted a remix type thing at the time that the album came out. So there's some like Reckoner beautiful stems, because obviously all those performances are amazing. But so yeah, I try to get creative and try to figure out how to isolate parts and see what I can hear.
I remember downloading those stems on the day they came out. And I think like everybody, if you watched, or if you're into Radiohead and you're watching what's happening at that time, like they had the free album come out, then they had the free stems. And I think like everyone who downloaded those stems, I was like, oh, I'm going to be the one who does something amazing with it. And then I actually never did anything with it. So, it's funny too when you're listening to your iTunes on shuffle, or I guess that's kind of a passe thing to do now. But I remember I'd be listening and oh, great music's coming up. And then all of a sudden just like an awkward bass line from Nude would appear in my shuffle. And
I still listen to iTunes. Yeah, that's the thing. Like I know it's the streaming world now, but I love still having like, my collection of music that I've gotten from, ripping CDs over the years, or going, and kind of finding stuff in different places. So, but the same thing happens to me. Like, I guess on a statistical average, because so much of my iTunes music library is Radiohead right now. If I play on shuffle, I'm getting like 3 Radiohead songs a minute every hour or something like that, because I've got like with the when the mini discs, when they released those or whatever, that was like just, you'll get like a random, piano snippet, or, Tom singing with a recorder, for 5 minutes. So, but those are awesome.
You're into mini disc too, eh? I had a mini disc player. I thought it was the coolest thing for a while.
Yeah, I guess not the mini discs themselves, but the recordings.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'm dating myself then, because in the late 90s.
I do know what it is. But yes, I have never actually physically held one.
I meant to kind of dive into that on another episode, which I have not done yet, partly because I haven't actually completely listened to all the mini discs myself. I think was it 9 of them or 16 of them that are each about an hour long?
Yeah, there's a lot. I forget exactly how many. I do remember listening through. It took me quite a few days to kind of get through all, just like, continuously. But and as with raw recordings, I'm sure that Radiohead never actually intended for us to hear. I guess there's some questionable things obviously around that. But yeah, there's some nuggets of gold, and then there's some things which is kind of like, oh, cool. Like the coolest thing about listening to those was hearing, you assume you hear some of Radiohead's music and you're like, oh, it's perfect. Like it came out of the box just like perfect. And like Tom York, crafted the song out of the ether. But they're a band and they're people, and it's awesome, refreshing to know that, they're human, and they write songs the same way that anybody who writes a song writes a song. It starts as something and it might go completely different, or it needs something, to hear those early versions of those songs is pretty cool.
Well, this look into their working method actually really is what brought me back to guitar. I'd taken a couple years and not really practiced and played too much, and thought to myself, well, I'll never be, that good of a songwriter. But I kind of got back into it because I was like, if Tom York needs 40 versions of, motion picture soundtrack or whatever,
yeah,
maybe it's okay that I sit there and screw around with something for 5 years myself, and it doesn't have to be perfect the first or even the millionth time, but one day you'll find it, maybe you won't.
Exactly. I think in my own experience trying to, to write songs, obviously when I'm writing too, it's, you feel that pressure. You're like, oh, it's got to like come out a certain way. If you're not like feeling it, you get kind of frustrated because you kind of want it to get to the sculpture and the marble like right away. But if you, like you said, if you let things kind of percolate and, come back to them, or take your time and just like let things develop, then sometimes some pretty cool stuff can happen. You can revisit ideas like Tom does, I'm sure, all the time with like the latest Moonshaped Pool songs that were old songs. They started life completely differently, before they ultimately were like, this is what I want, when he actually heard the sound he was thinking of,
Yeah, I think True Love Waits had been around since like 90 something. And that's a long time to percolate on a song.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I would be too impatient to wait 20 years or something per se.
Makes me wonder what's still in his head that we've never heard,
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit more about your Radiohead kind of experience, and we'll get into your covers and stuff. But I think you're the first guest who we've both been to the same show. So Osheaga Festival that was Montreal 2016. We were both there. So let's talk about that a little bit. What did you think about that show?
Well, it was awesome. I mean, every time I've seen Radiohead, it's not like, oh, Radiohead's having an off night. No, they're awesome. So I was, just locked in. I think, it was my first time actually at a bigger music festival. I'm used to usually going to see shows, and I see acts at, regular arena type venues or things like that. But going to a festival, it was an interesting experience just to kind of get the taste of that kind of experience too, which, obviously there was a lot of, cool stuff, and the food and the different stages, and kind of to see new bands that I did not know about, or things like that. was pretty cool. But I remember, who was it that was it M83 that went on right before them? I think that night. I can't.
Yeah, they were actually really good, and I
Yeah, they
didn't
were
think that they
good,
would be.
right? Yeah, yeah, and I had heard obviously the big like singles from them, like the Midnight City and stuff like that. But they put on a good show, so it was just kind of like it was interesting to see Radiohead for the first time, in a broader context of a festival lineup. But yeah, the show was awesome. And they finished with Creep, right? I think that was when they.
They did, and I think that was the first time in like 25 years they'd played it in Canada. But do you remember too before, like I was almost like freaking out because in my last concert before that one would have been the Toronto one where the stage collapsed. So I remember I was on the bus, I was on the way there, and my wife can speak several languages, and she's honestly not that big into going to concerts either. And she'd been wearing some bad shoes, so her feet were sore. And she'd been joking all day, oh, I don't really want to go. And I was like, look, you are going or I'm finding someone else to go. We are not skipping this. Like, we came here for this. And she was half kidding. But we got on the bus and she's like, oh, no, the concert's canceled. And I laughed. And I was like, this is not funny. But she could speak Spanish and a couple other languages. And someone across the bus was talking about a stage collapsing in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what the hell? And I went on Twitter and figured it out. And basically, we just kind of... Anyway, so that was my Toronto experience. But I waited 4 years to see them again. And we got there. And do you remember at the beginning when they came out on stage? And I can't remember who was supposed to play before, but the guy was like, look, everyone, bad news and good news. And everyone's like, oh, no.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the opening act has had to cancel, but... Radiohead's going to start early, and that's why they played like a 27-song set. We got so lucky.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah, that was. I remember thinking to myself because it was the artist, and I don't even remember who it was that was supposed to be there. I think it was like a DJ duo or something like that. They couldn't make it, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, well, you're actually telling me good news. Yeah, I was like, I'm on the good news side of this. I get more Radiohead. Fine by me.
Yeah, I was panicking for a second though, because I'd even got a nice spot. Like there was 100,000 people at that show, I think, and I was like 30 feet from the stage, which was awesome.
Yeah, I'm a little claustrophobic. Like honestly, yeah, like it was definitely like the most, packed like sardines type moment of my, yeah, like I was just like, there's so many people around and there was people passing out like near us that had been there like all day. And we were just kind of like, oh crap, something in the air.
Oh, totally. It was a pretty amazing concert. I wanted to ask you because you have been crafting Radiohead's sound and kind of building it for your covers, especially like you're building it to a very accurate level. And how do you go about trying to determine this? And do you think also, this is a really kind of side topic question, sorry, but it just came to mind, but Radiohead had this stage collapse, right? So do you think they're having to rebuild their own sound too in a similar way? And do you think they might be coming to videos like yours to kind of glean information?
I would love to think that, but I sadly don't. I don't think it's the case. I feel like they had a pretty good set of, backup. They've got a large arsenal of gear. We probably only see the tip of the iceberg of the gear they've actually used. But in terms of how I've kind of figured things out, some things kind of just trying to listen closely and, play. I'm lucky to have, obviously, the tools that I have at my disposal, having played, guitar for a while and, the collection of guitars and pedals and effects that I have. I've kind of can try to use those to get a good starting place and to go from. But I'd be remiss if I didn't obviously give a lot of credit to folks like, thekingofgear.com, which is a fabulous website that literally does a lot of that. They're with Rick Beato with stems. They are with like backstage photos and like knowledge of signal flow and pedal order and, all those things. So I do a lot of digging, kind of looking for resources on the web or looking, at live videos and things like that and trying to get a starting point for like, what does he go? Yeah, like, looking at a video like Johnny steps on this pedal here, like what, is that the delay? What is he adding there? What is he subtracting? Those kind of things. So, I rely on some external resources like the King of Gear, and I also kind of just mess around. Now knowing it's kind of using that website and doing a lot of these covers, it builds on itself. And once I start to get familiar with certain techniques, I can start to, hear them now. And like in the next song I go to cover, like, oh yeah, that sounds like this effect. That's definitely using a whammy there or something like that. Yeah, definitely. It's a fun thing though, because sometimes I'm at a loss, to try to figure out a way in, but I'm also grateful to have friends like Taka, Fluffy Momo in Japan. He was kind of, before I was doing my thing, he was my kind of inspiration for doing all this because he was like, he's an amazingly good, guitarist and multi-instrumentalist, and he had the Johnny Greenwood sound just like on lockdown. He's very good at that. So comparing notes with him, getting to meet him and collaborate with him has been good because, he always will, kind of tell me, no, actually, like he plays the part like this. And I'll like look into it and be like, oh, you're right. Like he can, we can kind of have that discourse too. So I have a lot of support and people that have helped me along the way in this tone journey.
So you mentioned the three guitarists of Radiohead, and of course that's one of the features of Radiohead, which makes them so interesting. And their sound is very orchestrated and very dense, but each player is sparse. It's kind of weird sometimes.
Yeah, they know how to not get in each other's way in like the perfect way possible. Like they all have kind of a dedicated part or role that they play. And it's kind of something I tried to like get at in the videos I was making. But yeah, it's with a three guitar band. I think earlier on, maybe when they were still kind of more in that traditional alt rock mode, there was maybe not redundancy, but some areas where it's like, okay, well, they're both playing, like a pretty distorted chord progression. This is pretty par for the course. Johnny's going to do a solo here, like more of a formulaic thing. Still brilliant, obviously, but a little bit different. But ever since, and obviously Ed talks about this all the time now, but since the Kid A era, they kind of moved into their own little non-overlapping spheres that kind of fill the whole picture, which is cool. Definitely something I appreciate about the way they approach it.
Well, it's super cool, and I think that you've done the best job probably on YouTube of analyzing the difference between them. For those listening, I do encourage you to go watch the videos, but we're just kind of going to go into each person briefly. So what would you say the different spheres that like Ed versus Johnny versus Tom are kind of trying to fill then, and how do they do it?
Tom actually, I think, is really the solid foundation. I think he's very underrated as a rhythm guitar player because, and I talked about this a little bit in the video, the voicings of the chords that he chooses, again, they have just the right amount, not too much, not too less of like harmonic information, like you can hear what the chord kind of is and how it is playing against the melody or against, the other instruments and things like that. And he's got a great right hand technique. He's just like very good at strumming both full chords, individual notes. So he makes, a very interesting rhythmic, kind of bedrock. And then upon which obviously, Ed does his thing, and he's obviously, with that pedal show when he was on that show, kind of talking about a lot of his, his tricks too. He comes from that, guitar as a synthesizer type or guitar as an oscillator, where he's using effects and he's kind of building things that sound somewhat synth-like, pads or drones or loops, things that you would notice if they weren't, it's like some people say, like, what is Ed actually doing? Sometimes they can't hear it or they can't tell, but it's like,
it's kind of a running joke. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, there's that awful yet somewhat funny, YouTube compilation video. It was like Ed O'Brien's best solos. And it's like him sitting in the background on like some of the songs, but it's like, that's the thing about Radiohead. They're so humble, each of them as musicians, like to be able to be like, on this song, I just play the maracas or something like that. But like as a whole, we are a unit, that kind of thing. So he brings a really cool ambient inspired approach, and he kind of has that ethereal sound. If you took it out, you would miss it, that kind of thing, right? Like you would know it's not exactly the same song if he wasn't playing. And then Johnny is, honestly, like it's like he publicly is very anti-guitar for a guitar player. He's just into obviously classically influenced things and, having the most formal training of anyone in terms of like the theoretical side. But he's always like finding cool ways to kind of experiment and use the guitar a slightly different way, but where you can kind of still hear a little bit more of a conventional technique than with Ed, for example. But like my favorite thing, I just say like probably my favorite example of this would be, I did a smaller video or piece about him using the delay pedal specifically. And it's like, most guitarists, if you use a delay pedal, it's like, oh, that's the big, like, arena solo sound, or something, you just got repeats and it is what it is, unless you're like the Edge and you're using it, as a composition tool. But Johnny kind of uses a little bit more like that. Like in Identikit, he's using it to flesh out, additional notes, like kind of create the rhythm out of the delay, like play with it and against it, as opposed to just using it as a background effect. Or the most famous one would probably be present tense. I love that part. It's so cool. He's just playing like three very spaced out notes, but when he uses the delay, everything just kind of turns into this cool arpeggiator, cycle, which sounds pretty awesome. They all kind of play their own role.
Well, it's interesting with Johnny because you're right, he is a bit anti-guitar sometimes, and the way they all play, sometimes I feel like they're sort of anti-guitar, but in a way they've reinvented the guitar, which is kind of cool. And Johnny particularly, though, like he could really shine with the technique, like some crazy abilities that I don't know that many other players in bands these days have. Like Go to Sleep, the end of that song is just incredible.
Right. For not being, vocally a guitar player. I mean, it's kind of like somebody like Johnny Marr, for example. Johnny Marr, when he talks about, I was learning to play guitar when everybody was like an 80s guitar hero and I didn't want to do crazy solos. I just wanted to make like interesting things happen. And so he developed that kind of arpeggiated style. Johnny Greenwood is in a similar way. Like he can solo with the best of them. I mean, yeah, some of those solos like Electioneering or Paranoid Android, he's ripping. He's playing some really good and pretty traditionally, classically kind of, traditional, not classical, but classic rock type, soloing modes, but mixing in some interesting stuff. But yeah.
I think this is so interesting about all the band members, though, and this is something that I think I have no idea actually how they perfected this skill, but they all seem to know exactly when to shine and when to sit back, and also how to do that as a band. Like, I've never, ever listened to Radiohead, especially Phil. Phil has to be one of the most accurate creative drummers of all time, but he has never once shown off on a Radiohead record. Imagine having that restraint even live.
Right. It's a very hard thing to do because I think people, I think they, Ed kind of talked about it, I feel like a little bit around the Kid A period where it was like, okay, well, I'm a guitar player and now we're not really using as much guitars. We're not using them the same way we use guitars, like, having that sort of an identity crisis, but all of the band members kind of have embraced that, right? Like Phil, great example, there are songs that are drum machine driven or totally sequenced, and it's like I like to think that it's just because they're kind of they pour themselves creatively into this collective effort that they are totally greater than the sum of their parts for sure. But even Phil, you're right, yeah, he's not, and I love his drumming because yeah, it's not flashy, but it's right where it needs to be. It's so perfectly groovy, like all of the very krautrock influenced stuff from King of Limbs onward, where he's doing that propulsing, it, it's like hearing the intro to Weird Fishes, you're pumped because it's Weird Fishes because he's got the count in and he's doing that awesome drum beat, and he keeps it going. Stamina, right? Like playing Body Snatchers or Full Stop for like that whole 5 or 6 minute song, that takes a lot of, having tried to do it. Actually, these are my twisted words. That song is very hard to play for 6 minutes, that same drum beat, because you just like get tired, but he's a champ. I do love Phil's drumming.
I got to see that song live in Seattle, which is like super rare because I think they've only played it like four or six times or something. It actually came up and I was like, what? Like, is this real?
I know, right?
The interplay actually between Tom and Johnny in that song was unbelievable. The way they were on stage, and it's so like the polyrhythms and it's just like syncopated and all this craziness. I was like, how can they just whip this song out after like 8 years of not playing it, do it once, and then never touch it for the whole tour?
Yeah. I've been in cover bands and I've played much simpler, much, more, just straight ahead classic rock songs for years. And even if I haven't played it for like 2 weeks, I'll still be like, forget a chord change. How do they remember this song, and know how to just nail it? Obviously the answer is they're practicing more than we see them, behind the scenes. But song like that, yeah, getting locked in like that with a polyrhythm is definitely a hard thing to do. I much respect for obviously their musicianship in that way, performing live.
Do you think that the members of Radiohead, or maybe some members and maybe not others, but are they thinking about these things and the music theory and all this stuff, or are they just doing really what they feel to be what they should do?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's like I think sometimes when I make the videos and I'm trying to dissect or I'm trying to talk about it, it probably sounds a lot, and I feel like some people have taken it to say like, oh, like, it is this formula that they've found the secret, formula to amazing music and they just use that. But I think with anything with theory, from what I know, again, my theory knowledge is not incredible. It's just, sort of basic and it gets me where I'm going. But that's kind of the point, I guess, is, it's a little bit descriptive rather than prescriptive. So I feel like, yeah, a lot of the great stuff that they've come up with over the years has been more of a process of experimentation. What sounds right is better, is always what's best. It's not necessarily what is right. Like they might throw in a cool major or minor chord where you could look at it from a music theory perspective. And it's like, they did this, because it actually introduces this other mode. And it might just be like, you know what, it sounded good. I think music is definitely what sounds good. And so developing an ear for that, which is something you can't really, teach. You just kind of have to, you get familiarity from listening to songs and kind of learning how those things work.
I think you're right. It works hand in hand, and I can draw on this from my own experience. I was making a song a while ago, just like a guitar song. But one day I was playing and I was like, damn, it's got kind of a weird vibe to it, but I want to reach these notes that I can't kind of. So I dropped one of the strings just to play with. And I now play it like that because I can get these notes that I otherwise couldn't get. After I found the sound I wanted, I then analyzed it and realized like, oh, wait, I'm getting some really cool like ninth chords and stuff that are really making this sound kind of fresh and interesting. And I wouldn't have found that without the playfulness, but I also wouldn't have known where to go with it without a bit of knowledge. So it kind of, I think it does kind of work.
just knowing theory won't make you a music robot that can't have any feel. And learning feel may, you're just gonna appreciate more what you're hearing and doing, when you learn a little bit about the theory behind it. That's, it's like knowing that you may not have needed to know that to make it, but if you understand it, then you can apply that concept in different ways. Kind of, you got to learn the rules a little bit to know how to break them, that kind of thing too. So totally. And yeah, like you said about tuning and experimentation, that's something I think Radiohead does tremendously well too. Some of their coolest, like, these are my twisted words, alternate tuning, right? Like, you think, like, how did they think to tune their guitar to this crazy tuning? And it's like, well, they played it, and then this note was a little bit too high, and so they turned the string down. Like, I love that kind of stuff.
Even Nude, what is it? Is it the fifth string that's raised?
I think it's the D string is up to an E, so it makes like a suspend. If you play like a regular major chord, it becomes kind of like a suspended major or whatever, because it's would that be a suspended or add two? It'd be like the Andy Summers chord, I guess, right? Like an add 9, add 2, something like that.
Well, it's crazy because I sometimes watch YouTube videos, and right away I can tell the people who are the best ear, and it's not me on guitar anyways, but the people who have the best ear from the ones who don't, because it's like little subtleties like that are not there. I once watched a Nude cover, and the guy hadn't changed that string, and I was like, dude, like, clearly this is not right. You're missing that little flavor, And you can try and get it there, but you'll never get it perfect. So the amazing thing too, and I wanted your thoughts on this, is how do you think they can do all this stuff? Like, they're all doing such intricate, crazy stuff on their own, but yet in the same way that Phil never sounds showy or flashy, it never sounds cheesy. I can't wrap my head around how,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, right. It's like, well, they've gone through different modes. I guess it's just about, like, they're all very on record about, just kind of serving the song, which is like a good approach to have, in songwriting, right? It's just like, whatever is what's the key thing about the song, and then just like build things around that complement it and don't take away from it. Like, interestingly, I mean, some of those things are very intricate, like Johnny's piano part on Daydreaming. Daydreaming is a very, kind of busy part, but it doesn't distract from like the beautifulness of the vocal melody or the strings or things like that. They all kind of come together. I guess it's, just by figuring out. I feel like I'd be interested to hear, and I guess some of like the mini disc stuff shows that off, where it's maybe they were playing a part that was too busy, and then they decided to kind of ratchet it back, or they did something differently. Like, they probably are the ones saying, before we even hear anything, they're like, that's probably too much, or that's too little. I wish I was a fly on the wall a lot of times, to know how they kind of get where they are, because it is a really thoughtful, without seeming, overly scripted, the way that they come up with those arrangements, because they're great arrangers for sure.
Well, it's crazy too, because like, I imagine the way it works, and again, you just said it, but I'd love to be a fly on the wall too, but I imagine the way it works is Tom comes in with something on guitar, because he's the primary songwriter, guitar or piano, and then they kind of all just flesh it out. But the hard part about that for me listening to it is Tom's rhythms are often so complex. Like, let's take Reckoner, for example. How they all imagine their parts out of that is mind-blowing to me.
Right. Tom isn't coming in with like, hey guys, I've got like a 1-4-5 in G or something like that. He's like, I've now made this beat. The beat is on the, like, good luck finding the one, it's like, yeah, videotape or Little by Little or something like that. Those are those things always blow my mind, because you like can't listen at it too long until you like, you hear a switch between, it's like an illusion, right? Like looking for where the, downbeats are sometimes. He's very good with rhythm and syncopation, which is a hard skill to have. Like with guitar, right? I mean, everybody thinks, a lot of guitar culture is about like being good means playing like really fast solos, but like being good is really about, do you have like absolute control over your right hand and over rhythm and vibrato and things like that, right? That you can't really teach. They just have to have a feel for.
It's funny because I just talked to one of the best jazz artists of all time on my other show called Clarinet, which is about clarinet. But his name's Eddie Daniels. He was just saying the same thing. Like, it took him years to realize that he could play fast, to realize he doesn't need to. So you can, so you don't have to, right? It's kind of a cool thing. And I think that's what with Radiohead too. That's a lot of their what we were just talking about as far as how they stay so humble in a way. They know they can do it, so they don't have to show it off constantly. Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you about not only the three band members, but also some of your covers and what we both love and enjoy about Radiohead. But before we go, is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
When did you first get turned on to Radiohead? I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about, because I know, my story, everybody's got their own, but how did it start for you?
For Radiohead, for me, it was funny because actually I drive past this store. When I drive past it, I still think about this every time, but it's since turned into something else. But it used to be a used CD shop, and I went in one day, and I asked the guy for some Matthew Good records. And Matthew Good was a guy in Canada here who's really famous, nowhere else really, but great songwriter. You should check it out, actually, if you haven't. I would argue one of the best. But anyways, I went in and I said, hey, I'm looking for whatever Matthew Good thing. He didn't have it. And back then, if they didn't have something, you couldn't get it. It wasn't like Spotify now where you just, I'll just listen to it at home. It was like, I can't get it. So I got to get something else to pass the time. So I said, what else might I like, Back when you trust the advice of someone at the store, too, instead of a Spotify playlist, right? And he said, you know what? You'd probably like Radiohead. Have you checked it out? And I said, well, no. So I picked up OK Computer, and I took it home, and I put it on. And I remember my first time listening to it, I had a really negative reaction. And I've since learned to realize that reaction means I'm going to like it.
It's funny that you say that. I feel like exactly the same way. It's like, because with me and Radiohead, it was actually before I had heard OK Computer, which was the thing that kind of tipped me over. When I was much younger, and when Hail to the Thief came out, I had an older friend who lent me the CD. She's like, check this out. And at the time, I was just listening to Hendrix and Zeppelin and Guitar Hero stuff. And then I was like, this is weird. We Suck Young Blood. What is this? I hate his voice. And I just totally put it away and forgot about it for years, and then came back. Everything comes full circle. If you like things right away, sometimes it's too easy. Sometimes the things that make you think are the things you end up liking the most.
Yeah, I think it's the things that kind of strike you. And I've since learned to kind of step back and be like, okay, why don't I like it? And I didn't. It's exactly what you just said. I didn't like it. I remember sitting there doing my math homework, and this music was in the background, Airbag, and I was like, this is so weird. There's something about it. But then as I listened that time and the next day, because it used to be too, you invest $25 in a CD, you have to listen to it. You can't just, I'm going to listen to this once and just throw it in the garbage. No, you'd put a couple weeks in, right? And every time I listened, I would hear something new. And finally I was like, okay, there's something here. I got to check out some of their other albums. And so I remember I skipped class and I went down to another record store, and I picked up Kid A, The Bends, and Pablo Honey, because that's all there really was, except for Amnesiac, which I didn't grab because it wasn't on sale, because it was the latest record at that point. It was Amnesiac, and Hail to the Thief was just about to come out. So I grabbed basically their whole back catalog, except for Amnesiac, which wasn't on sale, and Hail to the Thief, which didn't exist. And I went home and listened to them, and it was actually Pablo Honey that kind of originally made me kind of get into them, as dumb as that seems, because that was the most familiar music to what I'd been listening to at the time. Things like, that era, right? So that was like, okay, wait a minute, these guys can write normal music. Now let me listen to The Bends. And The Bends was a little more pushing things off into the distance. And then when I re-listened to OK Computer and finally Kid A, one of my favorite things to do used to be to kind of fall asleep listening to music and kind of stay in that half asleep state while you're listening. I don't know if anyone else does that, but I used to when I was younger and didn't have kids and a job and all that, just lay on the couch after school and kind of zone out. But I put Kid A on in one day in one of those half sleep states, and that's when it really blew my mind. I was like, holy, this is just something else. From then on, Kid A has always been my favorite record, but the whole catalog, it just seems like it opens like an onion. And there's always a new layer. And even now, you can listen to everything again. You'll always hear something new, which, again, blows my mind.
Yep, I love it. I don't know how they do it, but it's great. Yeah, every album is its own little world. You can kind of be like, today's a King of Limbs kind of day. And I will defend that album because I feel like some people don't like it that much. But, King of Limbs or, let's go to Amnesiac. Let's get kind of weird. Let's do something like that. That I love that, about their music for sure.
Well, we talked about that at the beginning, too. And I don't know what happens in the mind when you're listening to tracks sometimes, and then all of a sudden, like Knives Out one day, I'd never really been into that song. To me, it was just kind of the poppy filler on Amnesiac. And then one day I was like, wait a minute, there's some really cool stuff going on in here. And it just kind of, again, the onion opened up a little bit more. And suddenly I heard interesting things about the bass playing that I hadn't heard before. And I don't know. I don't know how they do it. But I also don't know how they have reinvented themselves so many times successfully.
Exactly. Yeah. It's usually, bands that try to do that and then it doesn't work out, go back to your classic sound, that kind of thing. But it's always very genuine, it doesn't feel like, oh, we're going to decide to be, I guess they did make a conscious effort around Kid A to, abandon a little bit of their past sound. But, the thing that for me, the eclecticism, the different influences in their music, and it's always anchored by one thing. Tom's melodies are always great. Even in the experimental songs, he has a good vocal melody. You can the song is still catchy, even though it's got some crazy stuff going on. Whatever like that.
I think the melody is one of Tom's greatest skills. The interest in his melodies is just unbelievable. So, well, I think we have definitely sufficiently nerded out about Radiohead today.
I could go on.
I know. It's always nice to talk with people like you because so many other people that aren't, there's two types of people, those who are like really into Radiohead and those who just aren't. And I just never understand. There's no in between, you know?
They're one of those bands. That's true. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just the way that it is. So, yeah, I mean, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, the conversation will end here. And if you're going to head on over to our Patreon page, you'll get access to a couple more extra questions. But I just want to encourage you also to check out Joe Edelmann's channel on YouTube. Really great stuff on there. And if you're like me, you can binge watch in there for a long time. One of the things I like about it is the videos are not, little 1 minute, oh, here's how to play this quick riff. He's got like 25-minute dives into Radiohead's pedal boards, and you're getting some great views too. Like I think that video has like 100,000 views now, close to it anyways.
Pretty happy that people have taken a liking to it, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really enjoy everything that you do. I can't wait to check out more.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate it.
It's been great chatting with you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to OK Podcast. For show notes for today's episode, please see our website at okpodcast.com/11. And if you enjoyed today's show, please do not forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and tell all your Radiohead-loving friends about it. I'm your host, Sean Perrin, signing off from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I look forward to seeing you next time on OK Podcast, the show where we discuss the musical and cultural impact of the world's greatest band, Radiohead.